going to talk about Zacchaeus this morning briefly. And that you read about it in the book of Luke. And one of the things that's really, really cool about the book of Luke, Luke was written differently than the other gospel stories. So Matthew, Mark, and John are eyewitness accounts of people who spent time with Jesus. Luke was slightly different. Luke wrote after, and he researched the details. He researched the information. And he tells us that at the beginning of Luke. And the interesting thing about the way Luke writes is Luke, more than any of the other eyewitness authors, because he's writing after, and he's writing more as an investigative journalist almost, what he does more than the others is he puts names, places, occupations, details about people's lives that the other people, the other authors, they don't include. So Luke writes differently. And you can see it straight away when we look at the story of Zacchaeus. It's in Luke 19 is the story. It says, Jesus entered Jericho, and he was passing through. And it says, so now we know where Jesus is going. Remember, Luke is all about detail. A man named Zacchaeus, he gives us the name. He was the chief tax collector and very wealthy. So in like that short little passage, you already know where he lives, who it is, and what his job is. This is like saying, speak to John, who lives on the high street at number 12 in Bedford, whatever it is, yeah? So this is what he's saying. Luke is giving the facts, because at the beginning of the book of Luke, he says, I've been tasked with investigating all of the information. So this is why he does it this way. So this is brilliant. And it says, Zacchaeus wanted to see Jesus, but because he was short. Like, why do you, Luke includes details that nobody else includes. So he was too short. He was not a very tall guy. He could not see over the crowd. So he ran up ahead. He climbs a sycamore tree because Jesus was coming that way. So there he is up in a tree. He's curious. He's wondering what's going on. And it says when Jesus got there, verse 5, it says when Jesus got there, he looks up and he says, Zacchaeus, come on down. I'm going to go to your house today. So he came down at once and he welcomed him gladly. And the people began to mutter among themselves because we know there was a crowd. Luke already told us the crowd is like, ugh. He has gone to the house of a sinner. It's like, ugh. And the reason they call him a sinner is not because that morning he took some extra cookies out of the biscuit tin or anything like that. When they say sinner, they mean somebody who's unclean. It's just who he is. It's not what he does, it's who he is. He's totally unclean. So in that culture at that time, he's just totally unclean. Now, nowadays, if you worked for the tax officer or the HMRC, we might not be very happy with you, but it still is a respectable job. Okay? But it's not like then, it was an unrespectable job. So if you were a tax collector back then, you're basically a traitor. Because you're working for the enemy, right? You're basically, you've changed sides. You're working with the Romans. The tax collectors were hated by their neighbors. You were not invited to eat with someone because you were unclean. You don't eat with someone who's unclean. A sinner is unclean. You do not spend time with someone who's unclean. You do not go into the house of someone who's unclean. He's unclean. So he's effectively ostracized from his own cultural community because of the job that he's taken or the job that he's doing as the tax collector. So he's just totally, you'd avoid him. He's disgusting. You'd avoid him at all costs. And this is why everybody is shocked that Jesus is intentionally choosing to hang out with this guy. And he did something that no one had expected. And the reason we don't expect it is because religion always says you have to clean up first. Religion says you clean up first to be accepted. So why did Jesus want to sit with him at a table? Because he hadn't even changed his life yet. He's moved from a tree to a table, but he hasn't done anything to earn it. He's moved from a tree to a table, and he hasn't changed his ways. He's gone from a tree to a table, and he hasn't repented. He's gone from a tree to a table, and he hasn't, what is Jesus doing? Jesus is messing up the whole system. And this is why, we kind of miss it, but this is why people are muttering and thinking, you are going to hang out with someone who's totally disgusting and unclean. And if you hung out with someone who was considered a sinner, then you yourself became unclean as well. See, Jesus is like, ugh, he's doing something you just wouldn't do, okay? It's not what you do. But Jesus knew Zacchaeus needed to be in a place where he could receive the love, the grace, and the truth that would lead to transformation. And that doesn't happen when you're stuck in a tree. It doesn't happen when you're still curious. Because there's lots of people in our lives who are curious. There's lots of people who are in our lives that are trying to get to a place where they can see a bit more and understand a bit more. There's lots of people who are curious. But being curious doesn't mean that you receive the love and the grace and the mercy that's available. Because you don't actually begin to understand unless you have relationship. But relationship doesn't happen in a tree. Relationship happens when you're sitting down at a table. When you're sitting together, because that's the environment where you actually begin to relate. And Jesus knew what Zacchaeus needed was not answers, but he needed a relationship. He didn't need someone to explain everything. He needed somebody to relate. And so Jesus welcomes him because he knows in the environment of relationship, that is where you'll begin to understand more about who Jesus is. And so that's why he wants to sit with them. And Jesus pulls up a table, if you like, for the despised. What happens next? You don't sit at the table forever, do you? So it says this, it says Zacchaeus got up. Verse 8, it says Zacchaeus stood up. And he says to the Lord, he's like, well, I've investigated everything. I thank you for sharing with me, and it's not for me. And he walks away, which is possible. People could do that. You know, we need to give people opportunity to learn more. And if they choose to walk away, they can choose to walk away. But Zacchaeus didn't do that. That would not be a very good story for this kind of morning. What he said was something totally radical. He says, look, Lord, here and now, I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, it doesn't mean, okay, if I upset you, I'm like really sorry. Okay, like if I offended you, well, I'm sorry. The language here is a bit clunky. What it means is for everyone who I have cheated. So if anyone has been cheated, if anyone has been cheated out of anything, I'm going to pay it back 4 times. He's not saying, okay, if I have. No, what he's saying is, for all of those I've cheated, I will pay them back 4 times. This is what the language actually says in the text. See, something happened. He got transformed. At that table, something happened. There was a transformation. And instead of him living the way he used to live, he decided to make some changes. It's like, okay, I used to work with very, very, very wealthy people. I looked after a number of professional footballers' accounts when I was in Liverpool, a number of actors, a number of celebrities, very, very, very wealthy people. Have you ever worked with very, very wealthy people? They're used to getting what they want, when they want it, and they're used to spending their money however they want it. They do not say, I'm going to give up half of everything I have. And for everybody that I've cheated, I'm going to pay them back 4 times. Okay, trust me. Whether you're wealthy or not, nobody says this. Unless something happens to change your heart. Unless something has happened to change you so much so that you realize that the way you're living is not the best way to live your life. Jesus didn't just want to hang out and have a meal. Jesus wanted him to know that there's a better way to live. And just because Jesus ate with him didn't mean he endorsed his behavior. Jesus ate with him because what Zacchaeus needed, he was in a tree and he needed a relationship. And out of that relationship, there was an environment where he could hear and understand the truth and the grace and the mercy that was available, which ultimately Zacchaeus made the choice to then walk away with a transformed life. Jesus didn't just want to feed him. Jesus didn't just want to hang out. Jesus wanted to restore him to a better life. He wanted to see him transformed. Zacchaeus totally had new ways of thinking, and his old ways of living has changed. And then Jesus makes this incredible declaration. He says, today salvation has come to this house, this man too, is a son of Abraham, which kind of seems a bit of a weird thing to say, but what he's ultimately saying culturally is this: he belongs in the family. Remember, he was an outcast. Remember, he was unclean. Remember, he was a disgusting, you don't ever hang out with him. And he's saying to the Jewish culture, this man is a son of Abraham. He belongs in the family. This is what he's saying. He belongs in the family. And then Jesus is now talking about himself. He calls himself the Son of Man. He says, for the Son of Man has come to seek and save the lost. Seek and save the lost. Another thing that Luke does more than any of the other gospel writers, he writes about the ostracized, the people on the edges of community, the poor. He talks about the widows more than anyone else. So it's interesting what Luke brings into the stories. He says the Son of Man has come to seek and save the lost. Zacchaeus moved from being an outsider who was curious to being an insider. Maybe another way to think of it is Zacchaeus moved from being just an observer who was curious, maybe even critical, and he moved to being a participator who had a seat at the table, who was invited and welcomed, and then to being a contributor who was now part of the mission. My life is now going to be lived totally different. Hey, I'm going to pay back. I'm going to give half of my wealth to the poor. He didn't have to do that. He could have just given back to people that he had defrauded. But he didn't just make it right. He actually did more than that. I'm going to give half of everything I have away. My life is now going to be lived, my resources are now going to be lived in a way that actually demonstrates to people that there's a better way to live and a better way to love. This is what he's doing. He's totally now becoming a contributor. So here at New Life Church, we want to make sure that we always make room at the table. We can always pull up another seat. We can always make another chair. Come on. There's never going to be a table that's full. We can always make room for more people. Always. Always. Because it's in the context of a table that people find relationship. And it's only in the context of relationship that people find the healing that they're really looking for. People don't just want answers. They want relationship. And it's in the context of a table. So that's what we're going to do here at New Life Church. We don't want people to feel like they have to stay up in a tree. You don't have to stay at a distance, observing, asking questions. That's a fine place to start. So many of us have started there. But we don't want people to feel like they have to stay there as an outsider, only ever looking in, wondering what's going on. We don't want that. We want to be able to sit down at a table. We want to be like Jesus because the table is where relationships are built and trust is established. It's so easy to draw boundaries and decide who does or doesn't fit in. You know what's harder than that? Making room. It's harder to make room. It's easy to draw lines. But we're going to be people who make room. We make room. It's harder to set out an extra plate. It's harder to prepare extra food. It's harder to have to sacrifice so someone else can have some of what we have. That's what's harder. And just because we sit with someone doesn't mean we endorse their life or their choices. Jesus never endorsed Zacchaeus. Let's not get confused. But our job is not to change people. That's Jesus' job. We can't change people. We can just create the environment. Jesus changes people's lives. Zacchaeus left that table a changed man after encountering Jesus. So our job is to pull up the chairs at the table. Whether we get misunderstood is fine. Whether we get criticized is fine. Because grace is risky and mercy can seem reckless. This is what Jesus has done for us. So that's why we do it for others. He allowed us a seat at the table before we had done anything to earn it. Didn't he invite us before we had changed? Didn't he invite us before we had realized the waywardness of our ways? Didn't he invite us before we'd actually got it all together? He invited us before we cleaned up. He invited us before we, scrubbed up and were all presentable and whatnot. Isn't that the grace that he gave us? So the same grace that he gave us is the grace that we want to extend for others. We love because he first loved us. So this year, as we start the year, we are making a declaration that we will start the way we mean to go on with a table. Relationship. Creating space to sit and eat and get to know one another. This is the way we mean to go on. It's not just the first meeting of the year. This is setting out the stall. We're going to set out the table. This is how we mean to go on. So I want to challenge you. Let's all remember the grace that we've received and find ways to get involved in the mission. Let's actively invite others, actively share what we have. And can we be like Jesus to seek and save the lost? And maybe today, if you feel like you're still in a tree, you're still curious, maybe even critical, you're still looking in, wondering, I want to invite you to sit with us. You're in the perfect place where we care for one another, we care for you. Why? Not because you've done anything amazing or spectacular, but because Jesus has done something amazing and spectacular. He has laid out a table for each and every one of us, and we can only give you the grace, the mercy, and the love that he gave us. So welcome. Today we're going to have a brunch, spend time fellowshipping with one another. A couple instructions. We've got some the gluten-free and dairy-free items are over by the hatch, so just to keep it a little bit separate from here. So if you've got that special dietary needs, please go over there. But just before we get ready to eat, I'd like to just pray for us, if that's all right. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this morning. Thank you for the incredible family, an incredible group of people. God, thank you for friends and strangers. God, thank you so much that you lay a table before us. Thank you for your generosity, your goodness, your kindness, your grace, your mercy. And I just pray for each and every one of us here that we would be reminded again to pull up a chair, to make room for those who might not have felt welcomed at the table. Help us do whatever we can to inspire people to find and follow you. God, thank you for the grace and mercy you've given us, and help us just to be conduits to share that grace and mercy with everyone around us. Thank you for this food and everyone who's prepared it. I ask you to just be with us. Bless us to our bodies. God, in your wonderful name we pray. Amen.